Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of December. Today we have some updates, so let's start. And today I would like to discuss with you one important topic, the battles. Can you tell me how many battles, real battles, can you name since the beginning of the special operation? You might say that there are battles every day. There are very heavy clashes used to be in Kherson area, and as a result of those clashes the Russians were forced to step back from this bank of the river. There are a lot of very heavy clashes around Avdiivka, but for now they're slowed down in this area, near Ugledar. There are clashes around Bakhmut. There was offensive operation in Kharkiv area and so on. But the question is, how many battles can you name since the beginning of the special operation? I analyzed this question during the day, and to tell the truth, I must say that since the beginning of the special operation, there was, or if we're talking about completed battles, there was just one battle in Ukraine. And I'm talking about the battle for Mariupol. If we're talking about Kherson, there were no battles there. There were a lot of clashes, but it was some kind of maneuvers. The Russians were trying to calculate the situation. The Ukrainians were attacking these bridges, but it wasn't a battle. If I'm talking about the real battle, I mean when one army on one side, another army on another side, and both armies decided not to step back. Or they don't have any possibilities to step back, and they decided not to surrender and to fight till the last bullet. So I can't say that Kherson was a battle. I can't say that the Kharkiv offensive operation was a battle. The Russians, as they're saying, they were some kind of using Mongolian tactic warfare, trying to step back, give the Ukrainians opportunities to stack in the north of Kharkiv. If we're talking about Mariupol, it was a battle. The Ukrainians were encircled there. They didn't have any possibilities or opportunities to break through, to evacuate from this area. I'm talking about Azov, and they decided to fight till the last Ukrainian. Before the battle for Mariupol started, there were around 20,000 of Ukrainians, and if you remember, just around 2,000 or 3,000 surrendered. Around 17,000 were killed during that operation. The same situation about the Russians. As far as I remember, around 25,000 or 30,000 was at the beginning of the storm of this battle from the Russian side, and to tell the truth, I don't have numbers how many soldiers the Russians lost during that battle. So that was the real battle when two armies stand against each other and decided to fight till the last soldier. If we're talking about Kharkiv, it wasn't a battle. The Ukrainians, I believe that they just started their engines, and when they went out of fuel, they stopped. And on that line, we see the front line these days. So that was the Kharkiv operation. It wasn't a battle. The Russians were stepping back, they were running, but they decided not to fight, not to give a battle to the Ukrainians. The same situation about Kherson. There is something that can remind us the battle for Avdiivka or something like this, but if it was a battle, we would see the complete of this battle. So if we're talking about the Russians, if they win this battle, if they won this battle, I believe we would see like encirclement of Avdiivka. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, if they won this battle, we would see some kind of, I don't know, the entrance in Donetsk, but it wasn't a battle. Some tactical maneuvers and something like this. And these days, we are the witnesses of the real second battle. And I'm talking the battle for Bakhmut. And this real battle where both armies decided to stand till the last soldier. The Russians decided to take this town no matter what. The Ukrainians decided to hold this town no matter what. If you remember, during the year, somewhere at the end of this summer, the Ukrainians told it, they promised that Severodonetsk and Lysychansk were the last towns that were taken by the Russians. They promised that. And they can't break their promise. From the Russian side, they understand the same situation. They need to take Bakhmut. So we are the witnesses of the second big battle in Bakhmut. And believe me, the results of this battle will determine the situation in Ukraine for many months in a row. Maybe the entire situation, even by summer, will be determined by the results of this battle. Now let's talk about the situation around Bakhmut, around the battle for Bakhmut. There are a lot of updates. Mainly we got updates from the Russian sources, from the Ministry of Defense, the same stories, the same numbers, and after that we will discuss another important topic that completely changed at least my understanding of the battle for Bakhmut and battle for New York agglomeration, because it's like the same stories of the same battle. We will discuss this like at the second part, the next part after we discuss the situation on the front lines. As you can see, according to the Russian source map, there were a lot of updates. The Ukrainians continue collecting forces in Orekhov, and these days the Ukrainian authorities, military authorities, or Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians started some kind of evacuation process from towns that located on the front line, from Palogi, from Tokmak, from this area. So the Russians decided to step back. I'm not sure, because I can't prove it or disapprove, because the Russians are not saying nothing about this. I believe that if the Russians military experts knew about that, of course I believe that they will raise this question, but for now no updates from their side. Furthermore, if we're talking about, let's say, Palogi, there was a update from the Ukrainian side that some kind of military staff was evacuated from this town in direction of Mariupol. And I can understand this, because there are very big construction in the Ukraine, in Mariupol. There are a lot of engineers, a lot of workers. We can say that they're building Mariupol since zero, from the ground, right? And they built some hospitals, they built a lot of places to live for, some kind of military stuff. So I believe that by the time the Russians completed this building, they decided to move some stuff from the front line, like hospital and so on, in this direction. So it's normal. It's normal. If we're talking about this area, today there was some kind of prisoners exchange, 50 Ukrainian soldiers for 50 Russian soldiers. Now we're moving to the South Donetsk area. The Ukrainians made counter-offensive operation in direction of Vladimirovka and in direction of Novomikhailov. So they were trying to attack on this line. It wasn't a big offensive operation. I believe that was some kind of recon in combat. The Ukrainians lost around 30 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. So as you can see, not much, just the regular daily situation. If we're talking about Donetsk, today the Russians reported that they established final control over this town Andreevka. We got this information yesterday, but we got this information from the local military experts, from the soldiers on the ground, and today this information was confirmed by the Russians Ministry of Defense. They confirmed that this town was taken by the Russians. I'm talking about this town, this Andreevka. This town is located on the Ukrainian side of this railroad rocket that moves from Bakhmut in direction of, let's say, Gorlovka. And this is very important that the Russians have bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of rocket, because if you remember, the Ukrainians are trying to do the same thing in Kupinsk front line, trying to cross this railroad rocket and to get on the Russian side of this rocket, but all their attempts were repulsed. And these days the Ukrainians made another attempt in this direction, in direction of Kuzyumovka, Novosilovska, and they lost around 60 soldiers and 15 armored vehicles. And as a result, this side, the right side of this rocket, is still in the Russian control. And from another side on Bakhmut, the Russians got some towns on the Ukrainian side of this rocket. If we're talking about Liman, there were the same stories, the same attacks in the same direction. The Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Plaschanovka, Chervonopopovka on this small back, and all their attack were repulsed as well. And as a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 20 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. And that's it about the ground, about the situation on the ground. Today I would like to discuss with you another important topic, because I believe that we are like in the end of this year, we are on some kind of logical part of the ending of this year. We are right in front of the final grand battle for Bakhmut, and this battle will determine a lot and will determine the beginning of the next year. So we need to just to discuss one important thing. we try to analyze this situation on the basis of a lot of maps, a lot of sources, and so on. And during this year, I was using around 3 maps to analyze, to understand the differences, and so on. There is the Russian sources map, and we know the story, the picture of this map, the borders, the front lines, and so on. We use the Western sources map, and to tell the truth, these 2 maps shows almost the same picture. And the third map we use is deployment map, where we're trying to understand the disposition of the forces. And if we compare these 2 maps, they show almost the same picture. There are small differences, but they are very small, very small. Let's say if we are talking about Donetsk, South Donetsk area, according to the Russian sources, towns by the name of Pavlovka, Mykolaiska, Vladimirovka, Blagodatная, this area, this arc is under Russian control. If we take a look at the map, deployment map, they show the same picture. Blagodatная, Vladimirovka, Mykolaiska, Pavlovka, almost the same. The only difference is that according to the deployment map, the Russians control just the east part of Pavlovka, and the Ukrainians still have control over the west-north part. If we take a look at the Western sources map, we see that the picture is a little bit different. For example, Blagodatная, Vladimirovka is still considered as the town that controlled under Ukrainian control. The difference is very big, of course, but anyway, these 2 towns is not so important in offensive operation in the south of Donetsk, so they are not very important. Not if we are talking about, let's say, Avdiivka, 3 maps shows almost the same stories. Even the same stories, there might be some differences between Vodyana and Opytnaya, but these days even these 3 maps shows almost the same thing. Opytnaya, Vodyana, and deployment map shows the same stories, like they're completely synchronized in these questions. Let's say if we move for, let's say, Bakhmut, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk area, there are 3 towns, or 3 points like Belogorovka, Zolotarevka, and Verkhnykamiansky oil refinery. If we take a look at the Western sources map, they show almost the same, but yes, they show almost the same. The only difference is, I believe, is deployment map. This map shows that Zolotarevka is under Ukrainian control, I believe so. So this is it. Yes, Zolotarevka, according to this map, is under Ukrainian control. But anyway, the front lines are the same. Even if we're talking about Bakhmut, almost the same. Just the difference in small villages and so on. And when we analyze, we understand that if 3 maps that have 3 different sources, the Western are based on one thing, the deployment another thing, the Russians. So we understand that situation is pretty as we see, and there is no there is no understanding or need to not to believe or to believe to this or another map. We understand everything perfect. But there is another map. There is a 4th map in the world. I believe there are a lot of maps. I'm talking about like those who is very popular, famous, we can trust to believe. Very often, using my analysis, I analyze the words or projection of Institute of Study of War. They have their own map. This is their map of war, and this map shows almost the same situation, but there is one important difference. And to tell the truth, I've mentioned this difference today, and this difference completely changed the entire story about Bakhmut and so on. We will discuss this situation just a moment later. If we take a look at this, the map of Institute of Study of War, they show almost the same. Pavlovka, Vladimirovka, by the way, this map shows that these towns is also under Russian control, Nikolska, so almost the same, just a small difference with the Russian sources about the north part of Nikolska. If we move to Vodyana and Pesky, they show completely the same story as we might see on the Russian sources map. The same situation we might see around Zolotarevka, Belogorovka. So what we can say that all these small changes is not so important. All 3 maps shows the same thing, and the difference between these maps is just small square meters on this or that front line. Yes, I believe it's true, but today I found a very important difference between these 2 maps, and to tell the truth, I'm not sure how to react and what to say about this difference, but I will tell you one thing, that during this summer I got a lot of updates, and I believe that you heard about those updates as well. But those days I asked myself why the Russian sources map haven't put those updates on their map. And after those clashes passed, I forgot about them. And these days, when I look at this map one more time, I found those differences, and I ask myself this question one more time: what's going on there, and what is going to be next? And to discuss the situation, let's talk one more time. I hope that in this context, we're going to discuss this town for the last time, and I'm talking about New York agglomeration and Toretsk. During the previous weeks, when the entire world was completely concentrated on Bakhmut battle and something like these energy facilities, on the Military Summer channel you heard that I was completely concentrated on this New York Toretsk agglomeration, because the Russians, if we're talking about the media sphere, about the situation on the ground, we have received just few updates from this town during the previous weeks and previous days. The first one was that the Russians attacked some command center in this area, like of the 1st Brigade. And the second was that Ukrainians moved a lot of reinforcements, a lot of ammo, shells, fuel to this area, because of expecting of upcoming attack from the Russian side. If we take a look at the Western sources map, we see the situation like New York and Toretsk. So the situation we understand. If we take a look at the Western sources map or the Russian sources map, we see the same picture. This is Toretsk, this is New York. The deployment map shows the same: New York, Toretsk. So no worries, we don't have any questions and so on. But if we take a look at the map of Institute of Study of War, the difference is obvious. As you can see, according to this map, the Russians have established almost complete control over New York. This is a small town by the name of Novoselovka. This is the new town. New York used to be called like Novoselovka, and after 2014, this town was renamed and became New York. It used to be Novoselovka. Now we know this town as New York. As you can see, according to the Institute of Study of War, the front line moves along Yurivka, and the front lines ends somewhere in parallel with Sukhaya Balka. So this is the front line. If we return back to the Western sources map, and because we are familiar with this map, we understand everything, I marked a lot of clouds in this map, so you're used to this map, and you can, I believe, you can coordinate yourself easily. So let's update this map according to the Institute of Study of War, and let's try to analyze the difference. So one more time, this is our New York. This is Yurivka, this is Sukhaya Balka. So as you can see, the front lines move on the north part of Yurivka. If we take a look at this map, this is our Yurivka and this is Sukhaya Balka. So according to the Institute of Study of War, the front line in this area moves something like this. So this is the real picture of New York Toretsk agglomeration. As you can see, the situation is not so good for the Ukrainians if we're talking about this control of area, because if the Ukrainians were there on the south part, this is a very long story for the Russians to penetrate this area and to get as close as possible to New York. But if we're talking about this configuration, this story completely changed the entire understanding of the battle for Bakhmut and Toretsk area. One more time, maybe the last one, I will try to explain the situation. If the Russians are able to take control over this territory, like Dachne or Delivka on this map, and small village Druzhba, this area, this situation became very critical for the Ukrainians. And if the situation about the south of New York, about this area, is true, and according to this map of the Institute of Study of War, I believe that this is a real picture. Furthermore, if we take a look at if you remember, somewhere in July and August, we got a lot of stories about the fact that the Russians started their counter-offensive operation in New York, that they entered the town. But the question is why the Russians, or why the Western map or any other map haven't updated this town and haven't colored this in red. I don't know. This is the only map that colored Novoselovka as a territory under Russian control. Now let's back to this area, and So we just discussed that the Russians, the only thing, according to this configuration of the front line, the only thing that the Russians need is to take Dachna and Druzhba. And if the Russians are able to do this from Delivka, from this or Dachna settlement, they will be able to establish real fire control over these two roads. And they can do this. If we compare, let's say, Dachna and these two roads, it's almost the same stories as the Russians are saying that by taking Andreevka and this area, they have established fire control over the road that moves from Chasov Yar to Bakhmut. So it's the same story. So if they establish fire control here, that means that they will be able to do the same here. And if the Russians are able to create such a configuration of the front line, they're going to be just two roads that Ukrainians in Toretsk and New York agglomeration will be able to use. This is the first road to supply and support this area, and this is the second one. And that's it. So as you can see, both two lines are located very close to the front line. And maybe the Ukrainians do have possibilities will have possibility to use this road, even if the Russians are able to take control over this part of Toretsk agglomeration. I believe that this road is already under fire control. And something tells me that these days, as soon as the Russians will stabilize some front around Bakhmut, because they need some rest, they need 2 or 3 days of some rest after this operation, and they will show something in this area. And after that, I believe we're going to see some activation in New York, and the Russians will try to move a little bit to the north. And the main idea in this area is to establish physical control over this road. And as soon as the Russians are able to do this, then we're going to talk about very bad situation in Toretsk. But anyway, as we discussed, and the Ukrainians and the Russians decided to give a battle in this area. Nobody is going to step back, nobody is going to retreat, and I'll explain you why. If the Russians are able, let's say, to take control over Bakhmut in a month, in a 2, it doesn't matter. Let's update this map. If the Russians are able to take control over Bakhmut, even according to this configuration, if the Russians are able somehow to take control over Toretsk New York agglomeration, let's update this map as well. Believe me, the Ukrainians will automatically step back from Chasov Yar, Konstantinovka, and Alexeyevka, Druzhivka. All this area will be collapsed automatically. And the next defense line we are going to see on this front line will move from Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkovka, Pokrovsk. So this is going to be the next defense line from the Ukrainian side on this front line. If these two towns falls, the entire area will be collapsed automatically. And the Ukrainians will be forced to step back from Konstantinovka even without a fight, because from this very moment, the Russians from Bakhmut will be able to develop their greatest offensive operation to the north, trying to encircle the Ukrainian forces in Seversk, and the Ukrainians and the Russians from New York agglomeration will be able to develop their offensive operation in this area. And as you can see, it's some kind of attack from two sides, and it's not a big deal. It's not a very good situation for Konstantinovka, for these small towns that locate on the roads, and they will be encircled automatically. So it's not an easy job to hold these towns. It will be another trap for the Ukrainians, and they will be forced to step back. Furthermore, from this area, as I see, as I understand, the Avdiivka will be collapsed as well automatically. And this is going to be the next defense line. And the question is if this defense line is already prepared for any attack. So this is the reason I'm telling you that to attack Bakhmut, just like the one target, is like useless waste of time and manpower. If the Russians want to achieve significant success, they need to start development these two both operations. I'm not sure if they have, if you remember, the Institute of Study of War, this institute that provided us this map, told us that by the end of this year, the Russians are planning to deploy 500,000 army on the territory of Ukraine. So believe me, the Russians do have manpower to do this operation. If they have will to do this, we'll see. If they have experience, we'll see. If they have this feeling of military art, we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.